afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Assembly Budget and Finance Committee. And I'd like to start with introductions, and we'll start at this side.
Shirley Nelson, Chair of Budget Advisory Commission.
Al Manny, I member of the Budget Advisory Commission.
Mike Chadwick, internal audit.
Patrick Flynn. Robert Harris, CFO.
Holden Burns, recommendation.
Elwood Briganti.
John Wagner. Bill Evans.
Brian Robinson, municipal assessor.
Kristen Bosky, are you on the phone?
I am here.
Great. And now the audience will start here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gabe Lehman with Cook Inlet Housing Authority.
Everybody.
I'm saying, I'm a student from West End.
Great. If you young lady.
I'm Mary Brown. I'm Alvin's best friend.
Visitors from New Jersey for the first time in 30 years. You, sir?
Bruce Clymer, I serve as chief executive for Providence Health and Services.
Good, excellent. All right, MOA financial status, Mr. Harris.
Thank you. Just sort of a brief update. Next month, I think, is when we'll have our first revenue status update. Those will start pouring in. And I don't know if somebody from OMB is here. Maybe if not, I'll just cover that. I
If
think.
I may, Mr. Harris, Lance is not going to be able to be here, and he sent a note ahead of time, and I have some comments that he gave me.
okay.
If you would like to make them, that would be wonderful.
Certainly. Yeah, let's make our glasses on. Okay. Okay, let's see, he's gonna be out, he's surfing, or, no, wait a second, he's taking a tour of municipal facilities, and, OMB is preparing and reviewing the budget calendar to develop the 2017 operating and capital budgets with the mayor's office. OMB is working to provide information necessary to the mayor for his initial operating and capital budgeting guidance to departments next month. The preliminary budget calendar will be available next week, and he's going to make sure Rose receives a copy for distribution to the assembly. Those are his comments.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Anything else, Mr. Harris?
No, only I was just going to say that my sense is that we're on target as far as our budget, or very close.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee.
Chair, as we move into the age of marijuana use, so I really want to capture the numbers on what's coming into us in the state. As you know, it's supposed to go to the state and come to us.
Yeah.
I just want to know where we're at on that.
I believe that we're sort of expecting revenues to start rolling in on the fourth quarter, somewhere near the end of September. I think is when we'll first start to see it. So we're, it's been a delay start to things. I think.
I think there's also, I think, the state, that money's nice, but there's also, I think they've got to pay to get a business license with us and
Okay.
I don't want to track one that's starting to get. We want to make sure we've got enough money coming in to cover the cost of our code enforcement officer.
Sure. I'll speak to Chair, Mr. Trainee. I'll make a note and get those answers.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. I'd like to recognize that Mr. Peterson has joined us. Anything else, Mr. Harris?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. We're now at agenda item report from the Budget Advisory Commission. Ms. Nelson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really don't have anything from the last meeting that I attended here. We have not had our monthly meeting, we take June off, so are scheduled hopefully for July. We're interested in talking about the school bonds and where that is at for the presentation to the assembly. So that's kind of the topic. And then back to the property tax exemptions. Al is here with us too from the Budget Commission, and he forwarded a link from, it's called the ACT Advisory Committee on Tax Exempt and Government Entities. It's to the IRS, and we have not, either one of us have not had time to really read the whole thing, but I will make sure that I forward it to Rose and she can forward it to you. But it's talking about the latest new tax exemptions from the IRS.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee.
Surely, the school district did an after-action report in favor of the school bonds. Do you have a copy of their analysis of why it failed?
I'm sorry, say that
Do you have a copy of the analysis the school district did on why the bonds failed?
No, I have not seen that.
I think you ought to request a copy as you guys deal with future bonds.
Mm-hmm.
Your recommendation, I'd like you to analyze why those bonds failed.
Okay, yes, I'll look forward to that. And I know I talked to Tam at the last school meeting that they had the bonds did come up. I think we're interested in knowing how they want to reapproach it, and, I think that we'll probably try to come up with some recommendations also.
My concern is I don't want their bonds to drag ours down.
Well, I think I brought it to the table before that really wasn't too much of a topic of discussion when this 49 million bond was put on the ballot, that waiting for the following next couple of years was 80 million and stuff. And so I think we need to be looking at the entire package and see what probably is the best avenue to be doing it, because they're adding a lot of the maintenance and stuff into the bonding.
I look forward to your report when it gets to the
Okay,
issue.
and we will be working on that stuff.
Thank you, Mrs. Nelson, thank you, Mr. Train. Anything else, Ms. Nelson?
I really have did you have any comments, Al?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, thank you, Colby. Mr. Steele, would you have anything?
No, I didn't.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Steele. Okay, we're now at item number 5, SAP project report. Mr. Darren, you have the floor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I passed out to the assembly here a copy, and I also have additional copies available if people would like to look here at this point in time on our status. I'd like to report currently that the entire project, as you can see through is green, so we are in good shape. And I'm just gonna kind of highlight some of the things that we're currently doing and where we're at on some of these as we progress through here. So, OCM, which was the ECM, I should say, the OpenText version, which was the electronic content management. They actually began the work sessions, and they are on site this week. So they are beginning the blueprinting and configuration, and they will be dealing with the 3 departments, ER, accounts payable, and purchasing, that are in the initial first phase. So that work has begun, and there was a lot of workshops and so forth going on with that. Additionally, one of the other items that we've been working on and that has been a little bit behind schedule, but we are trying to rapidly catch up, is our data conversion. So that's converting data from the PeopleSoft to the SAP system. And the initial analysis of that work was done, and the report was submitted over 2 weeks ago. They will be back on site with a strategic plan as well as a project plan, which will be delivered to us no later than next Friday. And we'll begin working with the municipal staff to identifying and working that way through the project. So those have been key things that we've been that are just starting up and being added to this particular project plan. As you can see from everything that we've currently been working on, we're in good shape all the way through. Things are progressing. The municipal workforce continues to work very diligently in accomplishing those tasks. The one thing that I will say to this, which might be a change we see next month, is that we have had a variety of additional items that came up through blueprinting, and called for the word RISIF several times and so forth. We have gone through those, reached agreement with SAP to incorporate some of those changes and so forth. So that is, those changes and that additional work is currently not reflected in this particular plan. So this is how we're doing right now. Outside of that, now that we've got agreement on that, they will then take the workload and the project schedules and everything for all of these RISIFs, all these other changes, and incorporate that into this particular plan. So dates and colors and deliverables and percentages complete will change, because this is on the entire project that we're looking at, realization type thing, currently excluding that. We wanted to put the project plan together based upon what we knew at that point in time, and now that these other decisions have been made, we'll add it to the plan and then incorporate that in there.
Can you pause for a moment? Thank you, Mr. Evans.
It's been my understanding that depending on how many of the changes are accepted, it could require additional funding. Did you get any sense of how much based on which changes have been accepted?
There are a variety of gaps in this particular thing. We looked at a small segment or a segment of that particular population, and we are currently trying to, and we believe we'll be able to accomplish those changes within our current budgeting allotment. There are always new things that are coming up, and we have some additional gaps that we will certainly be analyzing with the project. We're still only about 6 to 8 weeks into the real, 55-week schedule, so things are being developed. There are things on the horizon that we'll look at very diligently, and they could have an impact, but at this point, the 9 to 11 gaps that we're looking at incorporating that with the existing funding that we have.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I'd like to recognize that Mr. Dunbar has joined the meeting. Welcome, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Stern, please continue.
So anyway, We also have hired an additional staff for 2 members on OCM since the last time we were here, so we have a training lead now, and we have a communications lead. We continue to do a variety of presentations out with the municipal staff. We've had over 500-600 employees educated on what's going on. The training developer will start working on the training programs, which we're looking at 50 online courses. And then we'll be hiring some developers here in around the October timeframe to actually develop those courses. So from an OCM standpoint, things are moving along very well on that side. I'm on bottom of page 3 here on the development objects. You know, as I mentioned, OpenText is going well. PW, which is the reporting requirement, they're about a week away from the interview the person they want to be the lead on that, and that person will be coming online to start looking at our data reporting and data warehouse that we're going to be building. As I think I've mentioned several times, all these work streams have an SAP lead. That's one of the criteria that we wanted because they're all interrelate back. So we're in pretty good shape right now. We're making progress on a variety of different things. There's always things that are being interjected, but I think at this point things are moving forward pretty good. If I could refer you to the financial status, which is in that small graph on, put page numbers on here, but on the page there, it looks like page 4 with including the cover page. We are trying to maintain a weekly number based upon our actual versus the budget as they were doing. I actually asked them since the last time we did this to put a cumulative as well, so you can see with the cumulative run how we're running based upon where we started on the April 11th time frame here. We're very confident with our actuals and that where we're at. The budget numbers are the numbers that were given us to by SAP. We're still kind of fleshing out some tweaking that a little bit, but at this particular point in time, comparing our actuals to the budget, we're running about $324,000 to the good. I would attribute that to the fact that some of these work streams that we had, BW, data conversion, they probably were budgeting from day 1 of the project to be able to go through there. Some of those have been delayed as we've been working through different things. And then we also need to look at a few things, but at least we're not behind in any case at this particular point.
I had a question, just if you can close a moment. You just said we're $324,000 to the good.
At this point, with actuals compared to what was budgeted by SAP, that is correct.
So tell me exactly what that means.
That means that when they were budgeting to expend a certain amount of money, and what we actually spent for that period of time is less.
Thank you. Please continue.
So we're going to continue to look at that, make sure that their budget numbers are matched up, as well as we'll look as we trend. And that also might mean that if there's something that they thought that we're going to have a big hire here coming up, they may have budgeting that month or that week might go the other direction. But at this point in time, this is where we're at. Well, I want to turn to the next page on realization timeline. You can see where you're getting towards the end of June. At this particular point, the project is still on schedule. We will evaluate the impact of the schedule with all the gaps and changes that we're doing to see how we can incorporate them in there, but we are progressing along. We have included these 2 new charts. One I included last time, I believe, but we use this in our weekly project one, and I thought it was pretty interesting, where you can kind of see on a weekly basis where this is the project schedule status chart on the bottom of that page. It just kind of shows you week over week where some of the work is being done. And at this point, obviously, it's focused on the HCM Philo data stream areas with a little bit from OCM as we're working through this process. Some of the large development things or the planning things, those are either completed because they were part of the original time frame that we're doing this. But we're using it just to try to make sure we can kind of analyze what we're doing on a weekly basis. And then this may have something to do with where we are and why we're green and so forth. So on the very last page here, it's kind of the total tasks that have been expected to be accomplished to date. And as you can see, 79% of them are actually ahead of schedule on our timeline, and that could have some impact on our budget as well as the percentage that we have complete. And around 76 or 20% are tracking behind. Which is not good, and we're certainly trying to address those on an ongoing basis, but the point is, as long as our heads or our behinds are matching up that way, our project as a whole at the end of the timeline is going very well. So I think you can certainly see that the HCM area, which is our payroll / time benefits area, has been tracking very well. The Philo area, we have had some struggles because they are having difficulties with some of the work that was done by the prior vendors. So they're having to go through and evaluate what that was, try to figure out what was good, what was not good, and so forth to be able to do that. That has taken time and has taken money. Some of the gaps that we are dealing with right now, Mr. Evans brought up, are to fix things from prior vendors. So we're currently trying to incorporate that in our costs, but at some point, it was hard to estimate what some of those prior issues might be, and that may come back up at a future time. Whereas the HCM side, the time, for example, that is all net new stuff. That decision was made in November, so there's nothing for them to have to go through and correct. But on the Philo side, and as you can see, their late tasks, they actually have more late than they're on time because of that difficulty going through and analyzing those kind of things.
Mr. Tremaine?
Which vendor? Which vendor?
That is very difficult for us to be able to determine. If I had.
When you say a vendor, we have.
Either Black and Veatch or Peloton, they're not, each functional spec, it doesn't have who the vendor was at that point in time. We have 53 functional specs that we developed something and there's no documentation to show how we got there. That's one example of that. Whether that's related to Black and Veatch or Peloton, I don't know. I'll bet you it's probably a mixture of both. Most likely Black and Veatch, and then Peloton either didn't address it at that point in time or didn't discover it at that point in time. And Mr. Harris brought to the attention, I think we got the wrong date on the front here, so obviously, we're in June, so, this
We are in
is
June, huh?
This is June's report.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Mr. Evans.
As far as evaluating the tasks that are ahead and the ones that are behind, because it's hard for me to sometimes comprehend what that means, are tasks, are they roughly on the same magnitude of each other?
Well, I'll just kind of give you a history here. So the first stage was basically blueprinting, and there were 1,100 documents that we ended up with that particular one. Then we're in the realization stage, and there's two parts of realization, or there's three parts, but there's the functional spec, which is you're taking and you're diving into each of those processes more. Then once that functional spec is done, then they send it over to the technical side, and people actually write the programming and to make that happen. That's actually two different tasks for the same thing. Once that technical spec is done, then they send it to the developers who will actually go into the system and say, okay, make our system match this exact technical spec. So when you're looking at it, and when you go back to our work streams here, for example, on our chart, when you see how well HCM and Philo are doing, that's referring to the functional spec type thing. When you go to the development project plan, that's more the technical side of it. That's when you would get into the RISA development portion. That's actually taking those functional specs and doing that. So while that one task it's actually shown in two different areas because they have two different pieces and responsibilities. So one might be 100% finished with their functional, but the technical spec for that piece still might be in process before it can be. And once the functional people are done, then they start writing test scripts while the technical people are writing the documents. So a task is a specific thing that entity or that person is trying to accomplish, but that's why we have 12,000 tasks, but we only have 1,100 blueprint projects.
I mean, let me make myself clear. Where we have, 79% ahead of schedule, is it fair to say then, because 79% of the tasks are ahead of schedule, that 79% of the work is ahead of schedule?
That would be that would be an incorrect statement. So on a weekly basis, each consultant is expected to do a certain task or tasks for that particular week. If they accomplish those tasks and are able to go in and start working on the following tasks for the next week, which in this case might be 3 functional specs, we are HCM, for example, or as a group, 291 tasks that were to be started at a later date have already been started and completed. Versus on the other side, 76 that are already supposed to be done by now are still in process and we haven't finished.
And is it possible those 76 could be bigger tasks,
Yes.
more labor intensive?
Absolutely.
So essentially, not to criticize the graph, I really can't tell. I mean, it's one measure, but.
That is correct.
Okay.
But those tasks all were going to take a specific amount of time to be able to do. Some of the functional specs are 30 pages and some are 2 pages. So yeah, it does have a difference on that. that tend to take longer are the ones that involve the utilities and Muni, because you have to get the staffing and consistency on that. We're finding that those particular tasks, and I know that for a fact, these FILO ones are all ones that have to involve utilities because of getting the staff and the approvals and so forth, as well as agreement, is a challenge between all those three entities.
Thank you, Mr. Thurman, thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Flynn?
Well, we gently stumbled into an area which I unfortunately read a few minutes about before coming over here today. The one acronym not referred to in your report, sir, is EMO, which is Project Management Oversight.
Management
Office, okay. And I happened to glance at Zig's report before coming over this afternoon. Not feeling so good.
You're
about-
referring to the red column?
That
The
is
red-
correct.
So-
And how that affects the overall project, and he actually digs in the following slide, and I apologize, not everyone has this. This is,
We all have it.
we got emailed today, I don't know if you had it in front of you, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, that was emailed today? Cause I read a report that was emailed, oh, okay, so we don't have it yet. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Flynn.
Yeah, and speaks specifically to some FILO issues, MLNPs, not having budgeted for some of these things.
There's two issues with that. The reason why they're red is because we haven't reached resolution on the gaps. It's not because of the way the project is going. The PMO office put it red because if we don't get a decision or a solution between the gaps between SAP and the municipality in a short period of time, it's gonna have a negative impact on the schedule. So that's where they were trying to highlight that. Not that our current project is red, but they were basically saying if you don't make a decision now, on that. So that's why it's red. The other comment that's in there is a true concern that we have with regards to power plan that, I think it talks about the assembly having to do something because it was not in their budget, and that holding that up could have a negative impact on the SAP schedule. I believe it talks about a $1.5 or $1.6 million.
1.2.
$1.2 million budget revision that has to happen for power plan. The power plan has to interface with SAP, and if you don't get the power plan part done, then that particular part could have an impact. So that was risen by the one utility with regards to that. So we have to log it as an issue as they do. It's something that I can't control, but it could have a negative impact on the plan. I can assure you that when we have reached a resolution on most of these gaps that made that red, that next week's will not be red. But they coded it red because of that.
More of a comment than a question. During my tenure on the assembly, we've occasionally seen a certain amount of segregation by some of our enterprise activities from general government. And the committee that Mr. Steele has periodically inserted itself into that to bring a little more uniformity to participation by enterprises. So if that is a necessary step, by all means, please let us know so that we can make the appropriate gestures.
Well, I am concerned about this. I mean, as I've mentioned several times, every single component of this has to work for it to work at the very end. If we don't have an interface written because we're behind schedule, we either won't be able to use that interface, we will have to be workarounds, or we'll have to extend the project, which potentially could be a cost implication in regards to that. So, I believe that utility has a concern and has some timeline that they've listed in there that could potentially, if they don't get certain things done, impact the SAP project negatively.
This shouldn't have stuck up on anybody, so.
Anything else, Mr. Flynn? I just want to take a moment to thank you for having the opportunity to read that, because nobody else came this morning while we were at another event, but thank you. It's an important point that you made. Mr. Weddleton?
I want to follow up on that. So are you saying that there's, some of the enterprise users are dragging their feet on the project, or?
I wouldn't say that. I'll just say that historically, we have seen a certain amount of empire building within some of the enterprise units, and we've not sometimes gently broken down those barriers. And you and I can talk about that at length offline. It's probably not appropriate to do it in this setting.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson, thank you, Mr. Harris.
I think you do, Chair, Mr. Whittleton, and Mr. Flynn, just to kind of address this question about the $1.2 million. And what's going on there is that at the beginning of the year, when the budget's approved, the capital improvement plan for MLMP is approved. What they're asking to do is to move money between some of the large categories to basically sort of at the insistence of the municipality. They say, look, you're a department. We're going to treat you like you're an enterprise, but we're going to treat you like a department. We're going to manage you appropriately. And so they have. There might have been a time when they just could have said, look, we need to spend this money, so we're just going to like move the money around. Well, now if they want to do that, that's great, and we support that. But there's a process, and we're going to have them follow that process essentially, so that that when a decision is made to spend money that originally was intended for, let's say, telecommunications or upgraded Plant 7, that now in fact it's going to be used for the SAP dollars. Hopefully we'll do it in such a way and in a fashion that it won't slow things down, but that's really how that whole question comes about. We want to make sure that we're doing what the Assembly and wants us to do and what the code requires us to do.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Theron, do you have any?
Other than answering any more questions, that's all I have.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. Mr. Bosky, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Okay, thank you very much. We are now down to item number 6, nonprofit property tax exemption. Follow-up questions from May meeting that were asked by Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris, would you like to respond, or would you like for Mr. Robbins to respond? I know we have a handout from Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think in this case I'll ask Mr. Robbins to respond. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Harris forwarded me a number of questions from the last meeting, and does everyone have the handout? I passed out those questions. We've given written responses, but I'll walk through the responses and we can open up the discussion. As related to me, Ms. Flynn asked if credit unions pay property taxes, and the answer is yes, they do. It's a good question, and it illustrates a point with nonprofit exemption. Not all nonprofits are allowed a property tax exemption. There's two components to the property tax exemption. One is that the entity has to be nonprofit. The other is that the property has to be used for an exempt purpose. And those exempt purposes are religious, charitable, hospital, educational, and cemetery. So both parts of that equation have to be in place before a property qualifies for an exemption.
Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, I appreciate the answer, and actually I did a little follow-up on this on my own. Happened to have a very close personal friend that was on a board of a credit union. Some of you might know her. She served in this body once upon a time. And apparently credit unions are actually not nonprofits, they're not-for-profits. And therefore, while they don't pay federal tax as a not-for-profit entity, they do pay local taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Robbins, please continue.
Thank you. Also from Mr. Flynn, we were asked how often or if exempt entities are required to refile with us to maintain their nonprofit exemptions. Right now, there's no requirement to refile on an annual basis. And we have a fairly long write-up of the history of this issue. Close on to the next page. In summary, I believe back in 2009, the Assembly passed an ordinance requiring all nonprofits to recertify every year. We had a very low response rate, and we were faced with having to remove exemptions from a lot of nonprofit entities that clearly still qualified, but because they didn't recertify, they didn't qualify under the municipal code. Subsequent to that experience, that ordinance was repealed in essence, and we are though required to review the nonprofits on a regular basis. And so on page 2 at the bottom, I've kind of summarized some of the efforts that we're doing to date. We mailed out letters last year to all the nonprofits in the municipality. We asked them to, or reminded them of their legal duty to notify us if they've had a change in use of the property. We got a 5% response rate, but that did result in 5 changes in exemption status. We also, this year, have reviewed all the exempt vacant land in the municipality, and there are about 60 parcels that have exemptions. We're questioning 39 of those exemptions, and we're going to mail out, we have the letters already drafted, we're about ready to mail letters to those 39 entities. And in this case, if there's no response, we're going to remove those exemptions because our review indicates that they don't qualify, so.
Mr. Trainee?
Just a question, so it didn't work requiring annual certification, but you said you sent out 375, only 5% responded to it?
Correct.
So do we need to look at doing it again, but maybe every 2 years? My concern is we have a lot of out there not-for-profits that are not complying with the law. We could make it coercive enough that they will in fact respond to you. I'm asking you if it would hurt, if it would help or hurt you.
I have a recommendation of what I think we should do, and it really goes to the question from Mr. Dembowski about staffing. We need to review these on a regular basis, and we can do that ourselves if we have the staff. Right now, the customer service staff in our division is spread very thin. We simply don't have the staff to implement a robust auditing program for these entities. We're having to run overtime on an occasional basis in that group. We can address both those issues by adding one more staff member next year, and I can make a commitment to this body that I would be able to develop and implement an auditing program. And I think it would be reasonable to say that we're gonna review all nonprofit exemptions on a cyclical basis, like we review any other property. So once every 6 years, we'll do a thorough review of every nonprofit
And then if
entity.
they don't respond, we'll be automatically dropped.
Exactly.
Give me the numbers on what you need as far as money.
Okay.
As we get into budget time, I'll make a commitment to you that I'll push to get somebody to do this. Because if we've got all these out there, we've only got 5% responded to you, obviously, there's a lot of things we're never gonna catch because I won't respond to you. I
Yeah.
want us to respond to them.
Okay, and I'll get those.
Give me the numbers so I can work out what we need.
Okay.
The other thing would be, senior citizen property tax exemption. What do we do with dead senior citizens? Because I'm told there's a lot of dead senior citizens, but the problem is, the property is still listed as tax exempt, because nobody ever bothers to tell the city.
Yeah, we review obituaries, but some of those do slip by. And it's something I've wrestled with, and I frankly, I don't have a better solution than reviewing the obituaries at this point.
Not to turn your neighbor in, but could we come up with something to put on the city website? Do you know of a neighbor that's died recently? I'm just thinking there's ways to turn your neighbor in, and people will do it.
Well, and they do, and we do get a number of, we remove a number of exemptions every year because the neighbor turns in the neighbor. We can kick that around.
We kick it around, please, because I get calls all the time that say, do you know this person's been dead for 3 years? And I check, and they're still exempt. Why?
And if anybody knows of anything like that, please pass it on to us, we will act on it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Flynn?
Well, before we leave that last point, seems to me I was just reviewing the latest PERS newsletter, and they talked about, how you avoid identity theft when your PERS recipient passes away. And it listed some of the databases that record people's passing, whether it's through the Division of Vital Statistics of the state or PERS itself, personnel division of the state, the Department of Defense Department, all these different entities that are recording these passings. It seems to me there ought to be a way to synthesize that data. When you were talking about certifying nonprofit status or land use status of exempted properties, it seemed to me that Mr. Babb is the ideal person to task this with. How do you synthesize the data and for those that need to recertify, make a very simple step for them to go to this link and say, yes, this is the same thing we're using it for, or no, it's not, here's what we're using it for now. I think Mr. Dunbar wanted to jump in on that point. I have one more thing after that.
Well, Mr. Friend, why don't you continue and I'll come on this down?
All right, fair enough.
Thank you.
On the vacant land question, my ears perked up because I recall you mentioned the two-part test, nonprofit status and use of the facility. The list, could you repeat what the second part of that test was, what the use of the facility would be to qualify for exemption?
Well, that's me as a educational, religious, charitable, hospital, educational, or cemetery use.
Okay, so I'm just puzzling in my mind how a vacant piece of land would qualify for one of those categories. Is that the nature of frankly, that only 2/3 are up for question in that, under that test surprises me.
The ones that do qualify are typically parking lots supporting a building.
Oh, I wouldn't think of that as vacant land, okay.
Yeah, so those qualify because
Right.
they're needed for the operation of the building. But if there are a number of these properties that, the best we can tell, are simply vacant land, and I agree, I can't imagine how you could construe it as being used for any of those purposes, but we're gonna ask for the additional information.
Well, I mean, if you had a 30-acre parcel of relative wilderness and you were using it for outdoor education, I can see that, but,
We do have one of those.
yeah, okay. That's all, Madam Chair, thank you.
Mr. Friend, Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly off of what you were saying, I'm not sure if it was mentioned in that first newsletter, but Alaska actually does keep some of the best, most up-to-date data about people that are alive and where they're living through the permanent fund dividend and through the permanent fund. And people voluntarily, it's amazing. You give them $2,000, they go and they pull it out every year. And they tell you where you're living and if they're still living. And I don't think it would be too difficult for Brendan, for example, to set a tripwire where somebody didn't file when they were in their late 70s or 80s and be like, okay, and we would know. But just a thought. What's that?
People die of
Yeah, but people need a senior discount.
Hey, you know, Forrest, you're gonna get in real trouble if you start calling your colleagues old.
I'm not calling anybody old.
I've seen it happen before in this body.
Hey, if you were making
Excuse me, gentlemen, this is not a open discussion. Mr. Dunbar, anything else?
I think he's offering me the senior citizen discount.
Mr. Flynn, anything else? Mr. Robbins, please.
Speaking of the permanent fund, we did review 17,000 senior, disabled veteran, residential type exemptions this year as well. First, we started with an address match, making sure that they were receiving their mail at the location where the exemption occurred. If they weren't, we went to the PFD database to try to confirm from that point. And if we weren't able to confirm through the PFD database, then we sent out letters to them. We sent out 700 letters requesting additional information. This is ongoing, but if we don't get the information we need, we'll be stripping the exemptions off those 700 properties this year. So we're making, I feel like we're doing a pretty good job of managing the majority of the exemptions. Where we are still lacking is a systematic, cyclical auditing program of the nonprofits, and that needs to be in place. We've heard it from internal audit, we've heard it from the state assessor, and we recognize we need to do it. I've made a couple of tries at implementing a program, but we just simply don't have the staff right now.
Mr. Trainee?
This year, when? This year?
Excuse me?
You were saying this year we're gonna drop them. When?
It will
We're
be.
talking December 31st, or we
Just
talking?
after hurricane.
When are we talking?
It's I don't know. I'll say I don't know.
Fair enough.
I appreciate that, it's just, when you say this year, I want to know when.
Okay.
And like I said, get us the numbers you need for manpower. Because if you can prove to us you need the manpower, it will end up helping us purify the system. We'll work to get you the manpower. It's ridiculous we have to have what you need for the job.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. I have one suggestion based on what Mr. Trainee just said. Right now, the administration is in the process
covers that topic. Mr. Dombrowski asked if property appraisal had enough staff to handle the backlog of work. We currently have 2 vacant positions. We're trying to fill those right now. Once we fill those 2 vacant positions, we will be well situated to do the 17,000 inspections that we're required to do every year and do the basic valuation work. We're also able to manage the residential exemptions. So, and I've covered that in the previous response. But where we lack is that one position we need to fill in the gaps in customer service and implement the auditing program. We've talked to the administration already.
Great, Mr. Trainer.
How long have the 2 positions been vacant?
Long time.
Okay, what's the problem then? Just not enough money to hire them, or is the problem in HR? Getting it through?
The problem was that previous administration had increased the vacancy factor in our division to such a high level that if we filled the position, we'd go up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainer. Please continue.
But-
Mr. Roberts, please continue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, this is the cooking and housing question. And I think Mr. Lehman has responded to this. He was asked about properties owned by Cooking and Housing where the improvement was sold to a homeowner. We are mailing one assessment and one tax bill to those properties, and the taxpayer, the homeowner is paying the property tax.
If you
Mr.
want.
Flynn?
Yeah, just for those who weren't here last time, the nature of the question was, this is a relatively discrete number of 24, I believe you said, Mr. Lynn?
Yes, sir.
Properties that Cook Inlet Housing still owns the underlying lot and essentially has sold it, a 99-year lease or something of that nature, along with the home that's built on it to the owner. And my understanding is that the owner of the home pays both the property tax on the value of the home and the underlying value of the land.
Thank you,
And-
Mr. Flynn.
And Mr. Lehman also offered last time that as these homes turn over, they are not continuing that system where they're just selling the whole thing, kit and caboodle, with a first right of refusal retained by CHA.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Roberts, please continue.
Thank you. Mr. Melsky asked what value property tax exemption is for properties owned by CHA. Currently, our system indicates $39,420,000 in exempt properties. And I did want to note that Cook Inlet Housing makes voluntary payments on some of these properties, and last year they paid $91,000 in payments in lieu of tax.
Would you like to make a comment? sir?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the Assembly, thank you. I'd actually like to supplement that with the opportunity. Cook Inlet Housing Authority did make pilot payments in the amount of $91,097. But at the same time, we've also, even though our properties are exempt under state law, in addition to that $91,000, we contributed an additional $38,387 for example, we have some mixed-use buildings in Mountain View, for example, with retail on the first floor. We think the right thing to do is to pay essentially the equivalent of what our tax bill would be on those properties. So we've contributed to those types of properties another almost $40,000. And it's also important to point out that we paid an additional $302,439 in actual property taxes for low-income housing tax credit properties we've developed. So in actuality, the total amount of payment that we've handed over to the municipality is not $91,000, it's about $432,000.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, just you, I agree with your assessment that with those mixed-use development projects, we have that retail, the right thing to do is to pay that even though you don't have to. So I guess my question is, if hypothetically you were to go to the state legislature and ask them that you want to give us that ability, would you oppose it?
Through the chair, I'd have to go back and talk with our leadership about that. There are certainly circumstances in which such a commercial development could be primarily for not-for-profit purposes, right? To spur community redevelopment. good example, we are investing substantial sums in the redevelopment of the area around Spinard and 36th. That was really a dead zone that was undevelopable for a number of reasons by the private sector. Our goal is to take out everything that's blocking the private sector from coming in and redeveloping that area. So for example, dealing with contaminated properties, making sure that the contamination is pulled out of the ground, those become developable. There may be circumstances in which that kind of development that involves a commercial component might be predominantly motivated by not-for-profit objectives, and we have to kind of evaluate that kind of scenario.
Thank you, Mr. Lane, and thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Tony?
That concludes, everything I got, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rutherford?
Some of this gets, when we started off talking about credit unions, that even a credit union, there's certain activities that are core to the mission, that like selling insurance and so on, that they'll pay federal income tax on and so on. And then within the housing kind of parts and stuff, and I'm glad there's someone from Providence, because my dealings with Providence, fortunately, is mostly looking at land use plans and master plans and stuff, and a lot of it looks like, Providence is in the property management, building buildings, leasing them out to, doctors and so on. So are those buildings that Providence owns and manages? Do they own those, or what's the status there? And that's our biggest employment center, it's a huge part of town, so is that?
The non-hospital use properties are taxable, and we review that every year with Providence. In fact, the hospital is the one, property type that is still required to certify annually, and we work with Providence to get that certification and do the, divide up what is taxable, what is not taxable.
So is building K taxable, but the hospital, that old one has been there forever, is that?
I don't have the.
Mr. Lemmer's here.
The answer is building A is taxable, and it has to do with one of the criteria, that is the use of the specific property in that one. Building A is a medical office building, so those buildings that are occupied by, say, independent physicians paying a lease amount, all of those are taxable. And I think our tax bill may be in the range of $1.5 or $2 million a year.
Are there other activities that you pay on as well, or is that?
No, I think the principal line is the medical office building. And I'm drawing a line on anything else we might have that would not be deemed a hospital use.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Weddington. Do you have one more comment, sir?
Madam Chair, members of the Assembly, with your permission, I'd like to address a couple of the comments that were made previously. I think it can bring a little bit to the conversation.
If you can do it briefly, because we have another subject to discuss.
Absolutely. So
Thank you.
first and foremost, they issue the 5% response rate for nonprofits. That's because nonprofits were asked to respond if there were any changes. It doesn't mean that 19 out of 20 nonprofits simply ignored the notice that they received. So that merits some clarification. Second, I'd like to echo the sentiment that the assessor's office really could use additional support capacity. They do great with the staff that they have. We've had tremendous experiences with them, but it's very clear they're really operating at maximum capacity. The final comment that I'd like to make is, I'm also on the operating board of the Foraker Group, which represents Alaska's nonprofit sector. Speaking to you through that lens, I think it's important to know we see a bit of a different take on what the requirements are for the nonprofit tax exemption, that there really actually are two quote-unquote nonprofit exemptions. One's a mandatory exemption that's memorialized under the Alaska Constitution and state statute. There's a second optional tax exemption that's very similar. There's confusion here because that second optional exemption, which the meeting has opted into, requires two things. It requires ownership by a not-for-profit organization. There's a requirement that you demonstrate you're a certain kind of not-for-profit. And then you have to show that the property is in use for that community purpose. Here's the trick. The mandatory required state exemption requires two things. And this is actually supported by a 2004 Alaska Supreme Court decision that I'd be happy to forward along. It requires, one, that there be a is actually in use for a not-for-profit purpose. The mandatory exemption doesn't actually distinguish between the various types of nonprofits, and in fact, it doesn't actually, in state law, require ownership by a nonprofit. In the municipality's procedures for approving that required exemption, it has added in a requirement that an entity show that it is a nonprofit. But that was at the municipality's election, and really isn't supported by anything that we've seen in state law. And not to say that that's not an appropriate way to do things. So this issue of which nonprofits get the exemption and which don't is confusing because it's treated differently under the optional and mandatory exemptions. To be clear, that mandatory exemption, from what we've seen, doesn't actually distinguish between various types of nonprofits.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bosky, any questions?
No, not yet.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Well, we're going on to the next subject on the agenda, and that is information on 2011 nonprofit recertification audit by Mr. Chadwick, Captain, Internal Auditor. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I provided for you 2 reports that we've done in the last 10 years, one in 2006 and one in 2012, regarding real property exemptions. And really what we're looking at are the first 2 findings in each one of these reports. The comments made by Mr. Robbins, I believe, support these 2 findings. The first finding was regarding the review of the exemptions, and the second finding was regarding the documentation that the exemption files contain. And at that time, we found that the exemption files contained insufficient documentation in many cases to support the exemptions. For example, in 2012, we had 27 of 60 exemptions we reviewed had one or more of the required documents missing in their files. For the religious exemptions, for example, 10 of the 20 of them did not include copies of articles of incorporation, IRS determination of nonprofit status, use statement, contracts, etc. So we found that the documentation for these exemptions needed to be better maintained at that time. I think the first 2 findings really pertains to this conversation. We had other findings, but they didn't really pertain to this conversation that we're having today. So these are for your information, just to provide some additional background.
Thank you, Mr. Chadwick. Any questions, Mr. Chadwick? Okay. Mr. Mack.
I believe that the gentleman from housing made a good point. We need, and we recommended Budget Advisory Board changes in the state statute to make things more, definitive. Like, for example, an entity can be a state nonprofit, but not a federal nonprofit, right? Okay. So they can be a state nonprofit and they're exempt from property taxes, but they still pay federal income tax. So there's a lot of things that have to be done on the state statutes. And we made the recommendations in our report. And then secondly, once that happens, then the community can come back and modify those elements that concern the changes, in the state law. And in fact, the other recommendation we have made is that payment in lieu of taxes that can be offset by what the public good is, and they gotta provide that documentation. That's what they do in Andover, Massachusetts, payment in lieu of taxes, and I think that's the key and needs to be addressed in the state statute. So there's a lot of money out there. For example, the 2% fire extinguisher, off the property taxes. There's about $650,000. And fire suppression systems have been the code in Anchorage for how many years? 20, 25 years or more. So you take a look, if that's been in there for 20, 25 years, and we lose by, say, an average of those years, $500,000 a year, that's a lot of money. And the rest of us, the
Bosky?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Okay, we're now down to audience participation. Anybody want to make a comment or ask a question? No, I have a couple of comments. Please.
Madam Chair, I'll just make one brief comment, which
Okay.
is, I appreciate your comment about the 2% exemption for the fire sprinkler. Obviously, that's very different than issues related to capturing the not-for-profit sector. We've talked a bit today about kind of the legal basis for this exemption. All that aside, the nonprofit sector doesn't want to have this conversation with the MOA through a legal lens. We want to talk about it through a values lens. The nonprofit sector's perspective is that those exemptions are not necessarily something that the citizens of the municipality just do because they feel it's the right thing to do. They're doing it in exchange for value. The nonprofit sector brings value to taxpayers by reducing a number of costs. We can follow up with some additional information on that, but the point here is that this is a situation in which if you increase the tax burden and impose additional fees upon the nonprofit sector, their ability to deliver services that impact the overall public good is diminished. So either way, citizens of the municipality pay. The question is, which do you want? Do you want nonprofits to be able to deliver services the way they deliver them? Or do you want them to take more of the money that they would use to deliver those services and instead hand them over to the MOA in the form of a check? So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Just one quick
Nelson.
follow-up on that. I think if you did look at the report on the Brookline, the valuation, I think it brings to the public a necessary thing on what you are offering. So it works both ways. I think it's good for the public to know what you are offering, and it's more out there. And the other point is that it's totally voluntary too, with the study that we've done, the payment in lieu of taxes type thing. It's setting up little programs so that you're voluntarily willing to do this, but I think it's good for everyone to look at the valuation that comes from the nonprofits, and I think it benefits everyone, so, but.
Sir, just really quick, because I have some comments to make, we have a meeting after this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll just say, you've seen the nonprofit sector hit with the types of cuts in this state that even municipalities can't fathom. Just housing funds available to Cook Inland Housing Authority, for example. The three primary state sources that we use have been cut from 60 to 90% over the past 3 years. And for a municipality where we're delivering the bulk of the benefit of the funds we do receive, to then turn around and have this conversation about, well, you got to demonstrate more to us what you're doing, or we're going to increase that tax burden. It feels like the wrong type of conversation. I think we're very willing as a sector to have the conversation about the value we bring, but we also want to make sure folks realize that nonprofits are doing a lot with a little, and imposing a serious administrative burden on them, it comes with a real cost commitment for those nonprofits.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your comments. My comments follow. We're having this discussion at the Budget and Finance Committee level based on a report that was given to us by the Budget and Revenue Commission. And I agreed that we would have a discussion. And we had a discussion on the fire sprinkler issue. And that led to a bill at the state legislature level to, and nothing's happened, of course, to it yet. But the bill is basically asking them to allow municipalities to make the decision on their own whether or not they want to allow this sprinkler. So we have that in place. And the next subject was the nonprofits. And we've had robust discussion on nonprofit property as far as I'm concerned. We're going to see some progress through property appraisal. And we're going to see some follow-up also through property appraisal based on the findings in both of these audits. Mr. Tamagi mentioned the state level and change in state regulations. And if this committee wants to look into that, that's fine. But as far as I'm concerned, we're done with this discussion on nonprofits. And if anybody sees it any differently, then please speak up now, or, you know. But anyway, with that said, if there's no other comments, meeting adjourned.